So, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, the vintage watch market is absolutely insane right now. Classic watches from the likes of Rolex and Omega are selling for even more than their modern day equivalents. Whilst that might seem quite illogical, it really is unsurprising when you think about just how scarce good examples of these decades-old watches are becoming. Of course, one such hot watch is the Omega Seamaster 300. In particular, the second generation Seamaster 300, which was introduced in 1964 and which would be manufactured until 1970. This model would become one of Omega's most iconic, and it was even issued to British Royal Navy divers. As such, it's hardly surprising that this is such a desirable model today. It has everything a vintage collector could want. Not only is it a really beautiful looking watch, but it was made by one of the most well-known Swiss brands and has a history of usage by the military. The cherry on the cake is that with the 42mm case, it's the perfect size for modern tastes. Of course, such desirability can also be a bad thing, because it can give rise to fakes. Which brings us on to WatchCo. This now defunct Australian company used to be an Omega service centre and could therefore order in spares. And realising the desirability of vintage watches like the Seamaster 300, they decided to make use of Omega's extensive inventory to buy in as many Seamaster 300 parts as they could. They then sold these either as kits or assembled them themselves into fully fledged Omega Seamasters, using either new old stock or donor movements from older watches. The Seamaster we have here is one such example, but the key question is it fake? Because whilst this was never made by Omega or retailed by one of their dealers, all the parts are genuine Omega parts. If you're lucky enough to own an original Seamaster and you send it to Omega to be serviced, then they will use these same parts to repair and restore your watch. And to be fair to WatchCo, they were quite open about what they were doing. They weren't in any way deceptive. They didn't claim to be selling vintage watches. They just sold these for what they were and priced them a little bit lower than a genuine vintage example. Eventually, of course, Omega found out what WatchCo were doing and were understandably rather upset. As a result, Omega stopped selling parts to any third party that wasn't an authorised service centre at the end of 2015. A search on the Omega forums shows that WatchCo were still retailing their Seamasters in that year, so Omega's decision seems clearly linked to WatchCo's practices. They weren't the only ones either. The same forum thread shows that US retailer Otto Fry and UK-based Cousins also sold Seamaster parts. Given how easy it seems it was for anyone to acquire all the parts needed to build a Seamaster 300, it's unsurprising that Omega made the decision they did. Whilst it was unfortunate for independent watchmakers, you can understand Omega wanting to prevent the assembly of new vintage models. So, are these WatchCo Seamasters fakes? Well, I don't think so. Because as long as people are open and honest about what they are, I don't really see the problem. At the end of the day, they are made from genuine parts, so whilst I think it's a stretch to refer to these watches as genuine, they aren't really fakes either. They're somewhere in the middle, albeit walking a fine line between the two. Of course, some people might disagree, and rightly so, because these WatchCo pieces lack something that is absolutely crucial to any vintage object, and that's history and provenance. These WatchCo Seamasters just don't have the same mystique or charm that a truly original vintage watch does. And that's okay, because some people won't care about that. They'll just want a nice shiny new Seamaster. And I think that that's an equally valid way of looking at it as that of the die-hard collector who wants the watch to be as original as possible. As long as the buyer knows what they're buying and are happy with it, then that's all that matters. And if you're one such person who likes the sound of a WatchCo Seamaster, you can purchase this very watch from our friends over at Watches of Lancashire. We'll leave a link to their site down in the description below. If you'd like to read more about the history of the Omega Seamaster, and the WatchCo version in particular, we'll also leave links to the articles and sources we used to research this video in the description as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our video, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers!